The neon sign above the entrance flickered, casting a sickly, pulsating glow across the parking lot. Taro, Katana, Fall, Winter, and Dell stood before the glass doors of Taco Plex. From the outside, it looked like a standard shopping mall, but the air around it felt stagnant, heavy with the scent of stale oil and ozone. They were here for the paycheck, nothing more. Taro stepped forward, her boots clicking against the polished concrete floor as she pushed through the heavy entrance. The lobby was vast, cavernous, and unnervingly clean. Rows of plastic seating stretched into the shadows, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the low, rhythmic hum of the ventilation system. They moved toward the back office, their footsteps echoing against the tiled walls. Each of them felt it a prickle of unease, a sense that the building was watching them. They reached the time clock, a rusted metal unit bolted to the wall. One by one, they punched in. The machine gave a sharp mechanical clack. As the final card slid into the slot, the main doors hissed shut and locked with a heavy, final thud. The shift had begun. They were trapped. The first 4 hours were a blur of industrial-strength cleaner and heavy mops. Taro scrubbed the grease-slicked tiles near the food court, while Katana and Fall wiped down the plastic tables. The air smelled of synthetic lime and floor wax. Winter and Dell hauled bags of refuse to the back, their movements synchronized by exhaustion. Every few minutes, the overhead lights would dim, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the animatronic displays. During a routine check of the main stage, the lights cut out entirely. For 10 seconds, the only sound was their collective, ragged breathing. Then, the power surged back, and the animatronics remained frozen in their stiff plastic poses. They didn't stop to investigate. By 5:45 a.m., the group had retreated to the security office, waiting for the final minutes to tick away. The clock on the wall finally flipped to 6 a.m. A sharp, metallic click echoed through the lobby as the main entrance doors unlocked. They didn't look back. They pushed through the glass, stepping into the cool morning air. The second night did not offer the same routine. The manager had left a note, a single scrawled line demanding the storage unit be cleared before dawn. They found the door tucked behind the main stage, a heavy slab of steel that groaned in protest when Taro pushed it. Dust billowed out, thick and gray, coating their faces and stinging their eyes. They stepped inside, the beam of their single flashlight cutting through the gloom. It was a graveyard of discarded animatronic parts and forgotten mall decor. Plastic limbs were piled in the corners like broken timber, and the air here felt different, heavy, pressurized, and smelling of ozone and ancient plastic. Fall swept a layer of grime off a nearby crate, revealing a stack of faded documents from years past. The space was cramped, the ceiling low, and every movement kicked up clouds of debris that danced in the flashlight's narrow beam. They moved deeper into the clutter, their boots crunching on loose screws and discarded wiring. The silence was absolute, far heavier than it had been in the lobby. Taro reached out to steady herself, her hand brushing against something cold and solid hidden beneath a heavy tarp. Taro gripped the edge of the heavy fabric and yanked it aside. Beneath the grime sat a stone figure, its features worn smooth by time. Yet its eyes seemed to catch the flashlight beam with unnatural intensity. She reached out, her fingertips pressing against the cold, unyielding surface. A sudden, sharp hum vibrated through the floorboards, traveling up her arm and settling deep into her core. She gasped, pulling her hand back as a wave of heat surged through her body. She stumbled, her balance shifting as a sudden, heavy pressure manifested at her lower back. She reached behind her, eyes widening in confusion. Katana and Winter crowded around, their flashlights illuminating the change. Taro spun in a slow, disoriented circle, her movements hampered by the unexpected weight. Fall kicked a pile of debris aside, revealing a scrap of paper pinned to the base of the statue. She picked it up, squinting at the faded, handwritten ink. The group stood in the cramped, dusty space, staring at Taro, then at the statue, then back at each other. A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension. The laughter died as quickly as it had begun. A low, rhythmic thrumming sound vibrated through the floorboards, shaking the dust from the ceiling beams. It was not the hum of the ventilation system, but something sharper, more deliberate. The group exchanged glances, the humor of the previous moment replaced by a sharp, cold alertness. They scrambled out of the storage unit, boots thumping against the linoleum, and stopped dead at the edge of the main stage. The animatronic wolf, previously a static prop, stood upright. Its jaw hung slightly open, revealing rows of dull, metallic teeth. A sudden, electric pop echoed through the room, and the creature's eyes ignited with a harsh, flickering crimson light. It did not stand still. It tilted its head, the movement jerky and unnatural, and its gaze locked onto them with terrifying precision. Every muscle in its frame seemed to coil, tension radiating from its metallic joints. It took a single, fluid step forward, its claws scraping against the floor. The wolf lunged, its metallic frame a blur of motion. Taro screamed, a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the silence of the mall. They bolted, boots skidding on the polished floor as they sprinted toward the security office. The wolf was faster, its claws clattering rhythmically behind them, gaining ground with every stride. They turned a corner, but the path was blocked by a stack of overturned crates. Trapped, they slammed against the wall of lockers, chests heaving, eyes locked on the approaching predator. The wolf slowed, its head cocked, savoring the cornered prey. Suddenly, the locker door directly behind them swung wide with a violent bang. A figure tumbled out, sprawling onto the linoleum in a heap of limbs. It was Korn. She scrambled to her feet, eyes wide but focused, and slammed the locker door shut, effectively creating a makeshift barricade between them and the beast. She stood tall, pointing toward the ventilation shaft above the office door. The group did not wait. They surged forward, following Korn's lead. The security office offered only a temporary sanctuary. Outside, the wolf paced, its rhythmic scraping against the floorboards, a constant, maddening reminder of their confinement. Then, a new sound cut through the air, a wet, slithering friction against the metal ceiling panels. Tara looked up, her flashlight beam catching the glint of something long and segmented sliding through the ventilation shaft. It was not the wolf. A serpentine animatronic, its metallic body coiled like a spring, dropped from the vent and landed with a heavy, echoing thud in the hallway. It moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, its head swaying back and forth as it scanned the corridor. The group backed away from the door, pressing themselves into the corners of the small room. They were no longer dealing with a single predator. The wolf and the snake began to coordinate, the wolf prowling the main floor while the serpentine machine blocked the secondary exit. The air in the office grew stagnant, heavy with the smell of ozone and old dust. Every monitor on the desk flickered, displaying static that pulsed in time with the machines outside. They were trapped between two distinct, lethal threats. The office door groaned, the hinges screaming as the metal frame twisted under the pressure. Taro shoved the back exit open, and the group tumbled into the kitchen. It was a labyrinth of stainless steel counters and industrial fryers. The air here was thick with the smell of old grease and burnt flour. Behind them, the snake animatronic slithered through the doorway, its metallic segments clicking against the tile. Korn grabbed a heavy iron skillet, her knuckles white, while Fall snatched a bag of cornmeal from the shelf. They looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. If the machines tracked movement, they would drown the sound in chaos. Korn slammed the skillet onto the burner, the metal ringing out like a bell. Fall dumped the cornmeal into the hot oil, the resulting hiss and pop filling the room. They began to move with frantic, rhythmic purpose, tossing ingredients into pans and clattering utensils against the counters. The snake paused, its sensors overwhelmed by the sudden cacophony of cooking. It swayed, its head darting toward the noise, unable to pinpoint their exact location. The kitchen noise failed. The burner flames sputtered and died, leaving the room in sudden, suffocating quiet. The snake animatronic lunged from the shadows, its metallic jaws snapping inches from Korn's face. It coiled around the stainless steel prep table, crushing the metal as if it were paper. Korn stumbled backward, hitting the industrial fryer. The machine hissed, venting steam into the room. The snake struck again, its head darting forward with lethal speed. Corn did not retreat. She planted her feet, grabbed the snake's neck with both hands, and pulled. Metal groaned against metal. She twisted her torso, using the leverage of the counter to force the machine's head down. The snake thrashed, its tail whipping through the air. With a final guttural shout, she slammed the snake's head into the concrete floor. She tore at the exposed wiring and ripped the hydraulic neck joint clean. The machine shuddered, its eyes flickering once before going dark. Corn stood over the wreckage, chest heaving. The threat was broken. The sun bled over the horizon, casting long, pale light across the empty parking lot. They stepped out of the building, the cool morning air hitting their faces like a physical weight. The silence of the city felt heavy, a stark contrast to the mechanical violence. They walked without speaking, their movements stiff and heavy with exhaustion. A nearby cafe was already open, the scent of roasted coffee drifting through the door. They slumped into a booth, hands trembling as they wrapped their fingers around warm ceramic mugs. The clatter of the kitchen was gone, replaced by the mundane hum of a city waking up. They exchanged looks, a shared, fragile sense of victory settling over the table. They were alive. The nightmare was behind them. But back at the facility, in the dark corner of the kitchen, something shifted. The snake animatronic was not dead. Its internal circuits sparked, a faint, rhythmic pulse of power. It dragged its mangled chassis across the floor, leaving a jagged trail in the dust. It navigated by the lingering heat of the city. Its sensors locked onto the path leading straight to Taro's house. The group drank their coffee, completely unaware. The street remained quiet, a suburban stillness that masked the approach of the metal predator. The snake animatronic dragged its mangled, sparking chassis across the lawn, the metal scraping against the concrete path with a rhythmic, grating sound. It reached the side of the house, its optical sensors flickering with a dying, erratic violet light. It paused, its head swaying as it scanned the exterior. It found the window. The latch was loose. With a sudden, violent thrust of its hydraulic neck, it shattered the glass and forced its way inside. It slithered across the floorboards, leaving a trail of oil and twisted wire in its wake. The house was dark, silent, and empty. The machine moved with a singular, programmed purpose, ignoring the furniture and the signs of life. It stopped in the center of the room, its sensors locking onto a faint, electromagnetic signature beneath the floorboards. It coiled its body, using its remaining strength to pry at a loose panel. The wood splintered. It dug deeper, its metal claws tearing through the insulation until it struck a hidden compartment. The hatch popped open with a sharp, metallic click. Inside, resting in the dust, sat a single, unassuming USB drive. The machine's head dipped, its sensors focusing on the object, as the light in its eyes pulsed one final time before fading into total, absolute darkness. Taro pushed the front door open, her keys jingling in the sudden silence. They stopped dead in the hallway. The floor was scarred, littered with oily debris and broken glass. In the center of the room, the snake animatronic lay motionless, its metal casing twisted and cold. Fall stepped forward, her gaze locking onto the splintered floorboards near the machine's head. She reached down, pulling the small metallic USB drive from the hidden hatch. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with the scent of ozone and old grease. They gathered around the kitchen table, clearing away the remains of their morning coffee. Fall pulled her laptop from her bag and shoved the drive into the port. The screen flickered, a harsh blue light washing over their faces. Files popped up in rapid, jagged succession. They were not just logs, they were receipts, inventory lists, and internal memos dating back to 2010. Taro scrolled, her breath hitching as the text loaded. Human meat taco scandal. The words sat on the screen, cold and undeniable. They had been working for a monster, and the proof was right there, glowing in the dark. Taro leaned closer to the screen, her eyes tracing the lines of the 2010 incident logs. Suddenly, a file icon vanished. Then, another. The cursor moved on its own, highlighting entire directories of incriminating evidence. Someone was scrubbing the server clean. Taro slammed her hand onto the desk, pointing at the rapidly emptying folders. They were losing the trail. The facility was not just a front for horrors. It was an active crime scene, and the perpetrator was currently erasing their tracks. The group huddled around the laptop, watching the progress bars drop as the data logs dissolved into digital static. Fall tapped the keyboard, trying to override the deletion, but the system locked them out with a red, pulsing error message. The manager was watching them. They needed physical access to the source. They needed the master key to the manager's office. They turned to the window, watching the first light of dawn touch the horizon, knowing the clock was now their greatest enemy. The mall was a cacophony of noise and movement. Fall moved through the crowd, her eyes fixed on the owner. He stood near the main counter, shouting orders at the staff, while the keys at his hip caught the overhead lights. Every step toward him felt like walking on glass. A group of teenagers pushed past, momentarily blocking her view. She adjusted her path, weaving through the throng of people. The owner turned, his hand resting briefly on the metal ring of keys. Fall closed the distance, her heart hammering against her ribs. She bumped into him, feigning a stumble as she reached out to steady herself. Her fingers brushed the cold steel of the key ring. She pulled back, the metal sliding free from his belt loop with a faint, sharp click. She did not look back. She pushed through the heavy glass doors and out into the blinding daylight of the parking lot. Her hand tightened around the key, the jagged edges biting into her palm. She kept walking, blending into the city traffic. The mall was a tomb of shadows. Taro led the group through the service entrance, her boots silent on the cold tile. They moved in a tight formation, avoiding the sweeping beams of the security cameras. Every flicker of the neon signs felt like a spotlight. They reached the manager's office, a heavy steel door that stood as the final barrier. Fall pulled the stolen key from her pocket. Her hand trembled as she slid it into the lock. It jammed. She held her breath, twisted the key with both hands, and the mechanism groaned before clicking open. They slipped inside, the air heavy with the scent of stale grease and old paper. The office was a labyrinth of filing cabinets and stacks of ledgers. They split up, searching every drawer, every hidden compartment. Del pried open a locked floor safe, revealing a stack of documents dated back to 2010. The pages were yellowed, stained with dark, dried residue. Taro scanned the text, her eyes widening as she read the detailed logs of the meat sourcing. It was all there. The names, the dates, and the horrific truth of the restaurant's foundation. They had the evidence, and it was far worse than they had ever imagined. The silence in the office was absolute, until a heavy footfall echoed in the hallway. Taro froze, the document still clutched in her hands. The sound was deliberate, slow, and rhythmic. It stopped directly outside the office door. The handle rattled, then turned with a sharp metallic snap. The door swung inward, hitting the wall with a hollow boom that vibrated through the floor. The owner stood in the frame, his silhouette blocking the dim hallway light. He did not speak. His eyes swept across the room, landing on the open floor safe and the scattered files on the desk. His jaw tightened until the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. He took a step into the room, his movements stiff and predatory. The air in the office grew thick, charged with a sudden, violent intent. He looked at the group, then back to the evidence, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He reached behind him, his fingers closing around a heavy metal object resting on the side table. He did not offer a warning. He simply planted his feet, his gaze locked on them, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet as he prepared to strike. The owner lunged, the heavy metal object swinging in a wide, lethal arc. Taro ducked, the air whistling as the weight passed inches above her head, and shattered a glass display case. Shards sprayed across the floor, crunching under their boots as they scrambled backward. Fall grabbed a heavy ledger and threw it, hitting the owner in the chest, but he barely flinched. He shoved a desk aside, the wood screeching against the tile, and cornered Dell against the wall. The struggle was desperate, a blur of limbs and frantic motion. The owner reached for Dell, his fingers closing around her shoulder, but she twisted away, knocking a lamp to the floor. Darkness flickered, then stabilized. Just as the owner raised his hand for a final, crushing blow, a high-pitched, rhythmic sound cut through the office walls. It started as a faint whine, then swelled into a piercing, mechanical wail. Sirens. The owner froze, his hands suspended in midair. His head snapped toward the door, his face draining of color. Blue and red lights began to pulse. The owner dropped the metal object, the sound clattering against the floorboards as the office door burst open. Uniformed officers flooded the space, their movements precise and practiced. The owner did not fight. He stood motionless, his hands raised as the cold steel of handcuffs snapped around his wrists. One officer pushed him toward the door, his boots dragging against the carpet. The group stood back, chests heaving, watching the man who had haunted their nights being led away into the flashing blue light of the patrol cars. Outside, the neon sign of Taco Plex flickered one last time before a technician cut the power, plunging the mall-like structure into total darkness. The silence that followed was heavy, no longer filled with the hum of animatronics. Officers began placing yellow tape across the main entrance, sealing the glass doors with a finality that resonated through the empty lobby. Taro looked at the others, their faces pale. The street was silent. Only the distant hum of the city remained, a stark contrast to the mechanical shrieks that had filled their nights. Taro, Katana, Fall, Winter, Dell, and Korn stood in a loose circle, their shoulders brushing. No one spoke. There was no need. They looked back at the dark, boarded-up entrance of Taco Plex one last time. The neon was dead. The shadows were gone. Fall reached into a pocket, fingers brushing the cold surface of the USB drive. A final anchor to the truth they had unearthed. They turned in unison, their footsteps echoing on the pavement as they walked away from the site. The horizon began to pale, the first light of morning touching the rooftops. They moved slowly, limbs heavy with the exhaustion of 5 nights, yet their pace was steady. They stepped into the rising sun, leaving the darkness behind.